Welcome to the Daily Horror Habit Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Krieger, bringing you daily reviews of currently streaming horror movies for your twisted pleasure. Be aware that these reviews may include mild spoilers. And as always, I hope you enjoy. Today's review is of Trey Edward Shult's post-apocalyptic horror flick It Comes at Night, which is currently streaming on Netflix. Shult's sophomore film tells the tale of two families attempting to survive under one roof during a mysterious apocalypse. But as we quickly learn, danger doesn't come only from the outside world. And to discuss today's film is returning friend of the show, Berto. Hey man, how's it going?
What's happening?
I'm good. This was quite the film to pick, considering our current COVID situation. And I think, if anything, it definitely made me more anxious than the first time I watched it.
Yeah, it was definitely better on a rewatch.
Yeah, I mean, you and I both, we spoke briefly about it, but the first time we watched this when it came out back in 2017, I believe, we were pretty much lukewarm on it. Weren't necessarily really blown away, and it kind of was a movie that came and went for me. And I'm curious what you thought about it on a rewatch, how your impression of it changed, if at all.
Yeah, so when I first watched it, it was pretty slow. I thought it was really slow. And I don't know, maybe I didn't pay much attention to it just because of the fact that like it was pretty slow and it was just like dark. For me, I had a hard time like hearing them when they spoke with their mask on. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the thing, and then also like the echoing on the wall when the kid's in the attic. But at the beginning I thought it was pretty slow, and then the second time rewatching it, first thing I noticed, like I watched it yesterday, and it's like first thing I noticed was like, oh, this is some like extreme version of COVID kind of thing. Right. And then it's like, wow, like it's so relevant to now, and it's like, but now I don't know. I paid more attention, but I enjoyed it more the second time just because realizing like the character connection and just the story itself was really well done, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is something to watching this movie during COVID. There's a lot of parallels. Obviously, It Comes at Night. It's a lot more exaggerated, or in terms of the lethality, not to like downplay COVID, but the lethality of the virus or whatnot that's in the movie is a lot more deadly. And we see like people get black splotches on their skin very quickly. It only takes a day or so for you to become infected and eventually die. But it does add an extra layer, especially, like I said, to the tension, I think, and the overall paying attention to like things like cleanliness, hygiene, and things like that are things that we're very conscious of those things normally, because you and I are, for the most part, pretty normal people. But at the end, like an extra reliance on making sure that we're cleaning hands, that we're not touching our face, things like that. And to see our current COVID situation kind of exemplified in a really terrifying way, I think it just overall made the entire film resonate with me more so. But I'm curious, what was your expectation for the movie if you remember the first time you watched it? Because I remember my expectation for it being very heavily based on the trailer that came out before its release. And that, I think, plays into a big part of why I was lukewarm on the movie originally.
Yeah, I was expecting to be very creepy and very I don't know. I was just ready for some real scary moments, and that's not really what you get. Like there are creepy moments, there's creepy scenes, but it's not heavily like a monster or something. It's like not like, that's sort of expecting something to pop out of darkness kind of thing. And it wasn't that. It's mostly like story based, and it's more of a I guess the monsters are within the people in the story. So it's like it's one of those kind of movies where there's no physical monster. It's just like, I mean, there's a virus and so, but the monsters are the humans themselves and how they react in a intense stress situation. So my expectation, I was just excited to see it. Like I remember it was just like, it looks so creepy because it's filmed mostly in the dark, and it's like they're isolated inside this house where all the windows are like blocked off. And I was just excited to see and just be ready to be scared. But then it kind of like, it was like a letdown, to be honest, the first time watching it.
Yeah. And I think that this movie is a really interesting example of kind of like audience expectations based off of trailers, because probably like much like you, when I saw the trailer originally, it portrays the film as being almost a monster movie in a certain sense, or you assume that the infection leads to people turning into zombies. And we see that in the dream sequences, which are Travis's kind of way of dealing with different things. And I want to get more into the dreams later, but I think that my expectations were based off of the presentation of the trailer, in that, oh, this is going to be about people becoming infected and then the infected run wild and try to kill people and whatnot. And I was underwhelmed originally because that's not this movie at all. And I think
Right.
that it's very clear that people had certain expectations that this film didn't meet. And yet it just kind of speaks to how trailers can be a misperception of, or a misrepresentation rather, of what the actual final product is. Because I
Right.
was looking on Rotten Tomatoes, not that I try not to like pay attention to critic scores too much and kind of form my
Yeah.
own opinions or hear out what specific people that I talk to about movies like about movies. But I mean, this movie has an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes based on 248 reviews, but then the audience score is a 44% based on 20,000 reviews or
Right.
20,000 votes. And I think that it's interesting the stark contrast of those two scores. It's half of the audience score is half of what the critic score is.
Right.
And I just think that had the trailer not presented the movie as an infection viral kind of zombie movie, which
Mm.
they use those dream sequences to sell that, when the
Yeah.
dream sequences are a very vital and important part of the movie, but they're not the whole movie. That's not
Right.
what the movie is. And selling the movie on those scenes, I think, does a kind of a disservice in terms of it skewers your idea of what the movie's about. And then it's a movie that it's a good thing, I suppose, that you and I were able to appreciate it a lot more on a rewatch. But for people that are approaching it just based off of like the trailer, I
Yeah.
can understand why some people are disappointed in what they get, because they kind of go in expecting one thing and not everybody's as flexible on kind of accepting what they're getting, even if that's a contrast to what they were expecting.
Right. Like, yeah, like you were saying, the trailer overhyped it in that sense of, oh, there's monsters in it and there's zombies looking people in it. And that's kind of like, that's basically the thought that I went in watching it the first time. Then you realize there's nothing like that. That just happens to be a part of a dream in a sequence that the kid has, Travis. But it's nothing like, we don't actually see people walking around like dead zombies or monsters. It's completely opposite of that. And I think that's probably in the directors or the people that made the trailer, that's in their fault, the reason they got that kind of review, just to overhype it, thinking maybe they thought their story, the story itself wasn't good enough to drag people in, so they had to kind of stick out, I guess, is one of the better parts, I would say, because there's not much monster, or we don't get to see anything like that's deformed in that sense other than the dream sequence. So I feel like they kind of sold their best parts in the trailer and they kind of blew it, like they kind of screwed themselves up with that.
Yeah, they kind of it. I mean, to be fair, it's difficult to capture the morose nature of this overall film and it
Right.
being very character driven, especially when, I mean, his Schultz's original film, Krisha, is supposed to be very good from what I've heard, but at the same time, that's a very kind of like niche film that not a lot of people knew about. So I guess A24, the production company, decided like, hey, let's portray this movie as mass market appeal as we can, or kind of gravitating towards the largest audience, even if that gives certain people the wrong idea of what it is.
Right.
Whereas I think people like you and I that can really appreciate more niche films and lesser known films that aren't all about kind of like larger than life storytelling and effects and things like that, especially on a rewatch, like it really resonates with us in a way that it's hard to sell in a trailer, you know? Like
Yeah.
it's it's difficult to portray, especially like at the time this movie came out, Walking Dead, post-apocalyptic stories and all these things are so hot right now.
Hmm.
You're going to hedge your bets if you're a production company. You're going to want to advertise it as something that might make some people think it's veering into one category when in actuality it's much more of a drama or a thriller aspect. But
Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear what you thought about the way that the film in Schultz drops us into basically the midst of an apocalypse rather than the beginning. I feel like such a majority of post-apocalyptic movies and even zombie stuff, zombie movies and shows, they have a tendency to drop us in the beginning of an outbreak where we start to
Right.
see like, oh, that person got bit, then that person got bit, and then it just spirals out of control. Whereas in this, we're kind of thrown into an apocalypse, possibly months, possibly years into it, and we're playing catch up basically for the whole movie.
Yeah. I like the fact that like that we got thrown in something that's already been happening. For me, I had a couple of questions like how obviously I want to know how it got started, but they kind of it doesn't take too long to really get the hint of it's like oh the hint that's like it's a virus that's going around and you could transmit it through contact. Um, it's kind of I don't know. I guess the fact that we're in this COVID thing, like COVID situation, lockdown, I think it made the second time going around like watching it, it made it for me. It's easier to understand. It's like oh, it's a virus. It's very simple. Like you get in contact with it, you will get sick. There's not much to it, and just the fact that the side effects can be so aggressive, where you break out and you're basically slowly dying from the inside. Um, but overall, I thought it was a good beginning. I enjoyed it, and I like the way it's filmed. Just the fact that it's in one specific environment inside the house, everything's locked down. It's the house is very creaky because it's made out of woods. That really helps with the effect of the fear, and like especially when they walk at night and like they're walking through the house with a lantern on, and it's like really like I feel like every shadow that reflects off the wall kind of like waiting for something to pop up, which
Mhm.
adds more to the intensity of the movie.
Yeah, and I think that it's really important the way that Schultz starts the film off, and that we see the reality of the situation. And it's like
Mm,
they're out in the woods, cut off from everybody. This is what happens when you get sick, and we kind of get a harsh lesson in survival 101, as it were, in that we see the grandfather is sick, and we're kind of like playing catch up essentially in the beginning because we don't know how they handle people being sick. We don't know if he's about to turn into something because again,
right.
like in the trailer for the movie, I assumed, oh, he's got an hour or two at the most before he turns into a zombie or something. And then we get that him getting pushed in the wheelbarrow leading to the fire pit, basically, where they end up putting a pillow over his head and shooting him in the head, and then burning his body. And it's kind of just an incredibly bleak and sudden and shocking beginning to a movie that you understand the parameters of the entire world based off of that one scene. Like, this is the hard truth. If you want to live in this world, these are the types of things that you're going to have to do if you want to survive. And I mean, moments like that are so much more powerful than if we were given a montage or a shot of like a city that's on fire and people are kind of, we see like society crumbling. We don't need to see those scenes of society crumbling and people doing things that they normally wouldn't to survive, because these people that we meet, the characters, like they're living proof of an apocalypse. Like they're also kind of nonchalant about what has to happen. And it's difficult for Travis to see that. And we see how it's difficult for him and his mother. Obviously, they just lost their grandfather, but there's no kind of hysterics and whatnot that might normally be involved in the scene where it's like, hey, we have to put this person down.
One of the things you just said earlier, like I really like the fact that we don't get to see the whole city melting down kind of thing situation, because I feel like that's so repetitive. Like you see it in every movie. Like when there's a zombie outbreak, you see there's explosions in the city, like Dawn of the Dead kind of thing. It's like we've
Yeah.
already seen that. So it's kind of cool that we jump straight into these people have already been locked down. They kind of are aware there's a virus, and I really like the fact how they like Travis is the main focus of like how he's dealing with the drama, like with the trauma
Mm.
of seeing his grandpa die, seeing the fact that his dad killed his grandpa in front of him and they had to burn him. That really to me it adds a lot to the movie, just as the sense of a teenager dealing with such a traumatic event that's happening in his life, and same with with his mom, but I feel like I really like the focus of that. Basically, he is the main character. Like the dad's there as like I guess they're supporting actors and stuff, but like I feel like he's the fact that we get to see from a teenage point of view, such a young mind. Like he's just like such an innocent person that he has to witness all these like traumatic things, and I think that really helped the movie out.
Yeah, that perspective is really important too, because like you said, it would be very normal if we had kind of the male patriarch of a family and seeing the story through his eyes. We've seen that in every single zombie movie and show that's ever been made, essentially.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, we're seeing it through the eyes of an adolescent, basically, and how he is trying, how his mentality changes to these horrible things that he sees. And we see what it's like to grow up in a world like this that's so ravaged and it's based upon survival, and you have to be
Right.
the dominant force in every situation. And the moment you slip up is your death and the death of everybody and all of your loved ones. And
Mhm.
I think that decision is really important, especially when they introduce the new family, which is Will and his wife and son, it's important because it shows how this child who has been left in the woods with his parents for, it seems, months, how he reacts to seeing other people and meeting other people. And it's not a normal situation, obviously. And so
Yeah.
seeing how the adolescent experience is kind of influenced by such traumatic events and overall, like, a very depressing reality that they live, I think
Yeah.
that's really important. And it humanizes the movie in a way that, like you had said earlier, it gives a lot more credence to the focus being on characters and the horrors within themselves rather than some mysterious force roaming through the woods or a monster that breaks into the house.
Yeah, no, it definitely helps. Like even to see, like I know Andrew, the kid that comes with Kim and Will, which is the family they find. It's like he's so young, he doesn't have a clue of what's going on. But Travis being the teenager who's already there, like he knows, he's very well aware of what's going on and very well aware of the relationship and how careful they have to be when they're meeting someone else or another family. Just because the dad Paul, he's very in the protective side. You can tell, like even throughout the whole movie you see he's very defensive about everything. He questions everything because all he cares about is his family and him and himself. And that kind of like, it kind of like you can see throughout the movie that the relationship kind of starts distancing, like
Mm-hmm.
between Travis and Paul. It's like because Travis, I feel it's to me, I get the idea. It's like Travis is like, why do we have to be mean to everybody we see? Why can't we just be friendly? But at the same time, Paul has this other, like he's thinking of a survival point of view, not like Travis where he just wants to meet people and get to know people because he
Mm-hmm.
hasn't really experienced that part of his life yet. So
Yeah.
I really enjoy that.
Yeah, it's a rude wake up call. And I mean, their relationship is very much at the center of the movie. And it shows just how growing up in this world, you're going to need those harsh realities and those harsh truths. Otherwise, again, when survival is the number one thing, you can't allow yourself any room for mistake or error. And so, Paul, it's interesting on a rewatch, based on the way that Paul and his wife handle all of these situations. His wife's name is Sarah, played by Carmen Ejogo. Um, just the way that they react to all these situations, it's almost as if they've done everything before. And it
Yeah.
leads me to believe like Will is not the first person that tries to break into their house. Like
Right.
they know exactly what to do. They know exactly how they handle that. Whether and they, I mean, they have that quarantine room out in the front of the house, but then they also even know like, oh, we're gonna go tie him up to a tree and check in on him in a day. And we even see Paul is when he ties Will to the tree, he watches him through the peephole in the house for a day, I believe. And at first I was like, yeah, he wants to see if he's infected or not. But then also I was realizing like he wants to see if he is telling the truth about being alone. Because perhaps he told them, oh, I'm not with anybody. And then a day later, 3 of his buddies show up and try to untie him so they can try to take over the house again. Like that decision for Paul to do that struck me in a new way that shows this is not their first kind of like survival rodeo. And his being so conflicted about trusting people and being very cautious about everybody he meets, it has to stem from somewhere. Nobody is kind of like this survivalist expert in how to handle an apocalypse based off of pure instinct unless they've had to deal with this situation before or in a way that had negative ramifications in the past. And they obviously learn real quick when the stakes are that high, you can't make those mistakes more than once.
Right. And now that you bring that up, I didn't think about the fact that they tied him. I thought they tied Will up to the pole just because of the virus protocol, like a virus protocol. I didn't really think about it. Oh, maybe someone would have come to help him out. I didn't even think of that. It didn't cross my mind about it. But now that I think about it, yeah, it makes sense. Like you can definitely tell that this is not their first rodeo when they come in contact with someone else during these dangerous times. And yeah, you can tell that Paul has definitely killed people before, just the way he reacts. Like he doesn't hesitate to, like, he'll shoot you if he needs to. At the same time, like you definitely get the sense of like Sarah she's not in for helping. Like she's not in for killing people. She'd rather talk it out rather than being able to harm someone else. And she is, I guess, more of the nicer person in the relationship, the nicer part of the couple. But yeah, I enjoyed Paul's character. Is probably one of my favorite characters, just because he has like this this like father figure that he has to protect his family, and he knows like he's just very aggressive in everything he does. And and there's parts where you could see once Will comes into the family, he kind of like questioned Will and like the relationship between Will and Travis, where Will is showing him how to cut wood, and he kind of like, it seems like I get the vibe that he's kind of like jealous that he didn't get to experience that with Travis, where like that growing moment where you can see like he's teaching him, and you can tell that Travis is having fun, and he's kind of like not involved in that. And that definitely kind of shows like he's just very distancing because he's so always thinking about survival that he kind of loses that connection with Travis.
Right, yeah. And I think that, again, like Paul and Travis's relationship and how that contrasts to Will and Travis's relationship, like Will is very much more of the subdued person in terms of just the way that he emotes, the way he deals with situations and things like that, compared to Egerton's character, Paul, who is very reactive to everything. And he's very like, he's not even 0 to 100. He's like 0 to 5,000 essentially.
Yeah.
He just goes into like over alert mode. This is a situation that needs to get handled now. We can't take any chances. And that contrast, I think, is really important because it shows kind of what Will, or rather what Travis is looking for in a mentor. Travis being an adolescent, he wants the more low-key, relatable person that treats this is not the end-all, be-all of our existence. Whereas his father realizes, and probably he realizes this, but it's almost to a fault of his relationship and how it's viewed with the family. It is all about survival. And the second you forget that, you're going to end up like grandpa, and we're going to be putting you in a wheelbarrow. Like, it's just the very kind of the stark reality of that, which I think the film does really well. And it lends this idea that the narrative is so well developed and it focuses on the character relationships in a way that you can't really sell that in a trailer. Not to like keep bringing it back to the trailer of the movie, but this is one of those movies that I hold up as an example of a film that you absolutely should not watch the trailer before watching it. It doesn't give you an accurate representation of the final product, but also, I don't know, my weird brain, I start to like piece together certain scenes while I'm watching the movie that were in the trailer. And and it's like all I can focus on. And I'm like, oh, that was from the trailer. How is this going to play out in the narrative and things like that? But it is very much a film that is not sold best in a 90-second trailer. But let's get into some of like the dreams, because the dreams play such an important aspect of the overall atmosphere and the tone of the movie in a way that I placed a much greater emphasis on a rewatch than I did originally. That being like the film is cut up at certain periods where Travis at night has these dreams that are either otherworldly or they're just kind of representation of how he is feeling at that given moment. So what did you think about the role that dreams play in this?
I thought, I mean, they were very important to me, at least because we get to see more of Travis and how he's dealing with this whole trauma of being locked down and there's a virus. And I feel like every dream that he had was based on that moment, because we kind of get to see like once Will comes in, like his first dream was his dad or his grandpa becoming sick and becoming almost this monster-like thing. And then it's like once Will and his family, Kim and Andrew, come in the house, he has a dream of Travis sleeping with Kim. And it's like, I feel like he's kind of like dealing with the trauma of meeting. This is it seems like their first couple that they bring into the house, and he's a teenager mind. I'm sure his hormones are going like crazy. Yeah. And it's like, he's like relating to every situation that's happening in the moment. So it kind of like, it shows you like play by play, every time something happens, it's like he has a certain negative dream attached to it, which I really like. I think it really emphasizes like, it brings more of like, Travis, he kind of like, he's on his own world. That really shows that he's like having a really hard time dealing with the fact that there's a new family. His grandpa just got killed. He saw his dad kill his grandpa. And it's just like a lot of trauma that happens in his life.
Yeah. And I think it's really important, again, to your point about the adolescence thing. And adolescence, like you have crazy hormones going on. You're still developing in certain ways. And it's interesting getting into the mindset of a character like that in that age and how he's processing everything around him through dreams. And we get to see not only his fears, but also his desires. Like he sees Kim, he finds her attractive. He is not really flirty with her when they meet in the kitchen late at night, but you can tell there's an attraction there. And he feels like he wants to say something, but he's so awkward and uncomfortable around women or just other people in general that, and obviously she has a son with another man, but you can tell that attraction is there. And yet, even in a dream that is about him having sex with her, there still is that overlying thing that kind of rules their life, and that's fear. That's fear of what is going to happen to you if you get infected. And it's interesting how his brain creates this recurring association with being sick and that being like black goo, essentially, where she's on top of him and they're making out. And then she pulls her head back and this black goo from her mouth starts dripping into his mouth. And then we see like later on in the film, he sees that his hands are covered in black goo in another dream. Yeah. And even his grandfather, when his grandfather shows up in a dream as a zombie, essentially, he's leaking black glue from his eyes. His eyes are black, completely blacked out and everything. And it's just interesting to see how no matter what you're thinking about in this time period and where this event is happening, like it's all ruled by fear. And it kind of bleeds into that idea that you mentioned early on. It's not about the monsters outside. It's more about like internal monsters that are formed through fear.
Right. It also, it feels like it goes to show how like strong the mind is, like to the sense where it's like it's over dramatic or dramatizing this virus where it's like there's no black goo actually comes out of you. Like there's no black goo coming out of your mouth when you're dying. Like you're just sick with a virus. You get like breakout, your skin breaks out and you just die. It's not like you're going to be like dripping blood or whatever goo coming out of your mouth. It's like, and you can also, it kind of like, to me, it shows like your mind, you create the fear in your head of how scary this virus really is. It's all up to you and in your brain.
Yeah. And a way that I think this movie does a really fantastic job of grounding itself in reality. Obviously, the premise of there being a killer virus out there is not that far-fetched, but I think the way that it really humanizes the story for me and makes it very relatable, and it's a pretty, I mean, maybe this is just me being cynical, but the film really focuses on the idea that you can't trust anybody in the film. Right. Like, again, part of being dropped into this apocalypse months or years into it is that we don't know anything about anybody. We only know what we see, essentially. We can make assumptions and we can kind of feed off of little bits of information. And yet, at the end of the day, we really don't know. So the idea that we know who the good guy, quote unquote, is in this movie is not really accurate. Again, I assume Travis is being portrayed as being the, for lack of a better word, like the pure one. He's very innocent in a lot of ways. He's a child in a world that is ravaged by death and violence. And yet we don't know anything about his family. So just because he seems like he's got good intentions and he's friendly and wants to meet new people and all of these things and wants to be accepting, we don't know anything about his parents. And that is never more apparent than when Will shows up. And Will breaks into the house. He claims he doesn't know anybody lives there. And yet we don't know if he has other people with him in the woods and whatnot. And we even see like during the interrogation scene when Paul straps him to the tree and he's like interrogating him with rapid fire lightning round questions. Will has an answer for everything right away.
Right.
But then we start to see later on how some of those answers that he gave start to fall to the wayside and it presents a lot of doubt that doesn't necessarily lend a credence to this idea that, oh yeah, they live with us now, we can trust them. I think that ambush scene is the first real instance of that. What did you think?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was definitely a good scene. And that also is a scene where you can tell, like you were saying earlier, like no one's innocent, like in this world. Like it really all depends on which side you're looking at it from, but no one's innocent. Like everybody has their nasty side. But in that ambush scene, you really get to see like what kind of person Paul and Will is and how completely different they are, because Paul is the whole time thinking about survival. I got to kill them before they kill me. Will is thinking, well, maybe we can get some information out of these guys. Don't kill them. And obviously Paul has a gun, so he's the first one to kill both of them. And it's like, you really can tell that that's when for me at least, that's when it hit me. Like they're two completely different mindsets in this survival scenario. And like one of them wanted to get more information to see if there was more people alive, while the other one just rather be isolated in survival, and whoever comes near my house, I'm killing them. So that, I thought that was a really good scene, just to really put in perspective the kind of survival mentality that was in this world that they live in.
So that's a really interesting point that you made, because I think this is part of the genius of the film that really bleeds into the idea that you can't trust anyone. So the way that you interpreted it, I interpreted it a little differently, is that I agree. Paul is only thinking about his family, his survival and his family's survival. He knows that if he dies, more than likely his family's going to end up dying as a result of that. And while he is willing to like kill those people that ambush them, at the same time, I think I read more into Will's reaction when Paul executes that guy, in that Will's reaction is like, "Why did you do that?" And it's so over the top. And Paul reads into that and he says, "Do you know these guys?" And he starts accusing Will of like, "Is this the guy? Are these the guys that were with you when you tried to break into my house? Is this like a scouting party?" And it creates that doubt. And yet Will has an explanation right away. Like you said, his explanation is, we could have gotten information out of them. And I think there's enough reasonable doubt there that it raises the question, are these guys working with Will, or is Will really trying just to get information out of them? And I love that we don't get any concrete answers on anything, essentially. Mm-hmm. And that reasonable doubt, I think it makes the film especially enjoyable for me on a rewatch, in that I read into things more, and it shows there is a complexity to this world that you probably don't pick up on initially on a first watch. There's the idea that it's a survival movie in the apocalypse, but in rewatching it and realizing, hey, I have all these variables, but there's multiple outcomes and explanations for things. It just makes it that much more of an emphasis on surviving, and you can only trust your family. And we even hear Will say that at one point to Travis, or rather it was Paul who said that to Travis. He's like, "I don't care if these people are living with us. I don't care if they seem friendly. You can only trust your family." And I think that scene is a big indication of that kind of mentality, that it comes out later in the film, like when they break out the whiskey and he starts asking, and Paul starts asking Will about his family, and Will says like, "Yeah, I'm a single child." And then there's that "oh fuck" moment, because you see Paul's face and he's like, "I thought you said you had a brother."
Yeah.
And then he's like, "Oh yeah, well, I was staying with my wife's family and my brother-in-law." And he kind of has this very quick remedy to this "oh fuck" moment where, did he just get trapped in a lie?
Yeah.
But then he covers it up so quickly, and it might not even be a cover up. It might be, yeah, it was a slip of the tongue. But at the same time, it's not overt that he's lying, and it's never proven that he's lying. Perhaps, I mean, it made me think, like, if I was strapped to a tree and somebody had a gun on me and was saying like, "The first wrong answer you give, I'm gonna blow your head off."
Yeah.
I might make up a lie just to tell them what they want to hear, or I might make a slip up like that and refer to somebody as my brother instead of my brother-in-law. You know what I mean? Like, the lie that he potentially gets caught in is not so big that it kind of just flips our entire idea of what's happening on its head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that scene also, when they were talking and drinking whiskey, kind of like, you kind of see, like you were saying, like how quick on his feet Will is to like respond. And like, it seems like you're kind of nervous because like obviously Paul just questions them while they're in the house the whole time. They're like, "You still can't trust them. We've only known them for 24 hours or whatever." But it's like he's waiting for someone to slip up to give him a reason to kill them, because I don't think the whole time I had a feeling that Paul did not want them in there. So he's just kind of like trying to find an excuse for them to go away. And I feel like that was probably one of the moments where during that scene it was like, yeah, that could have been the time where Paul could have just kind of been like, "All right, you guys have to go or I'm going to kill you." But the fact that Will was so quick on his feet to respond, "Oh, my stepbrother," that kind of gave him more time, I guess, to survive. And now that I think about it, it's like that, I feel like those two people that they killed were probably with Will, which made sense if he said he was a single brother, or he's a single son, and then but his stepbrother. And I feel like the reason maybe he didn't want to kill those two people was because they were with him, they're relatives. So yeah, that kind of, at least right now, kind of tied in for me in thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a world where relationships are built around opportunity for resources, essentially. Like, these people are not living with one another because they necessarily like each other. They're living out of it for the necessity of, you have something I need, I have something you need, kind of thing. And I mean, at one point, Sarah says, "Oh, well, they could help us defend this place." Okay, but that's not really a reason why they're going to live together, because it's like, hey, we have guns, they have guns. It's not that big of a deal. But in terms of just like, I think it is a very interesting foundation of a relationship, and it being that shaky, where as soon as somebody has something more than what I have, that's going to make things uncomfortable. Or as
Yeah.
soon as a small little conflict comes up that could sprout into a much bigger conflict, like
Hmm.
the first instinct these people have is to cut ties. And
Right.
as we learn later on, cutting ties has some pretty drastic results in it. Also, one of the little things from that scene, I don't know if you picked up on it, was when Paul offers Will the whiskey, he
Yeah.
says, Will sees the bottle and he says, "Oh, no, no, that's not necessary." And then Paul says, "What, you don't drink?" And Will just responds, like, "I do." And
Uh,
that is such a subtle moment, but I kind of implied from that, or inferred from that rather, that Will is an alcoholic
right.
in that, because especially when he takes a sip of that and he's like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that," and he kind of like moans almost. And he's like, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's so smooth." And it was like, I have a feeling that if you're living in an apocalypse and you haven't been drinking regularly, you're not going to view any alcohol as smooth, really.
Right.
Just, I
Yeah.
mean, just as somebody that drinks pretty frequently, I can't imagine me going, like, if I go a month or two without drinking, the first thing I think when I have whiskey neat
Oof.
is not, "Oh, that's
Yeah.
so smooth." Like, it's harsher to it because you're not used to it. So
Right.
that idea of him saying it's so smooth, I think speaks to his character probably having some sort of like a chemical imbalance.
Hmm.
And not that like it's an indictment on people that might be alcoholics or anything like that, but I think it just proves that his character has layers to him that he's not willing to reveal, and he has certain secrets to him that he's not willing
Yeah.
to reveal. And even if it's by all accounts an inconsequential one, like, it doesn't matter, he's an alcoholic, it doesn't affect the narrative, it doesn't affect
Mhm.
his relationships with these characters. I do think it shows that he has a capacity for hiding things and for hiding and for having secrets. I think it's interesting that his alcoholism never comes up during the course of his kind of world or his life experiences that he brings up. Like, I feel like that's a pretty important milestone to call yourself
Right.
an alcoholic. You probably have to have some sort of bottoming event or rock
Yeah.
bottom. And so it's just interesting to me that it doesn't come up. And yet, from his body language and some of the small comments he makes, his character just has the capacity for secrets, even if we don't get concrete answers on what those secrets may or may not be.
Right. I feel like, yeah, like you were saying, like, Will is being honest to a certain extent with Paul, but he's only given him the information that Paul wants. He's not willing to open up more to him, which
Mhm.
kind of makes the relationship more tense to a certain point, because Paul is really questioning him the whole time. Like, he's like, I'm not sure if I can fully trust this guy. Like, he just doesn't see the chemistry there. But yeah, we definitely get that feeling. At least for me, I get the feeling it's like Will was giving him honest response to a certain extent. He wasn't being fully honest with Paul, but he was just being honest enough to where he can get his family to safety, which
Right.
was his priority. But yeah, definitely that scene was pretty that kind of like I raised an eyebrow to it. It's like, well, what else is he not telling him? Like, I'm curious as like, well, what kind of an alcoholic is he? Does he get very aggressive when he drinks, or what?
Mhm.
That's what I don't know. I was curious about that too, but I'm kind of glad that they didn't go that route, because I feel like the story could have gone out of hand in that sense.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't really comment. It doesn't become a part of the narrative. Like, alcoholism
Mhm.
doesn't become the narrative. It doesn't become a narrative kind of tool that we've seen before, where somebody gets shit faced and says one too many things they shouldn't have, or they're like have an extreme reaction that makes them violent.
Mhm.
Whereas uncertainty in and of itself of other people, I think, is basically like the disease, the real disease of the movie. In that once people become uncertain of one another and that paranoia sets in, we see how that unravels things overall.
Yeah.
It's more about a feeling or an emotion unraveling these characters in their perceived sanctuary that they're living in the woods by themselves. Whereas instead of a major plot event, because just because the little boy is coughing, I mean, we'll get into like the door in a minute, but the just in hearing the little boy coughing, enough doubt and uncertainty has been set in everybody's minds that that kid is sick. And we never get clarification that the boy is sick
Right.
until the very end of the movie. I mean, like, the characters themselves have no concrete evidence of anything. And
Right.
so just seeing how, if the groundwork of that paranoia and uncertainty wasn't laid, would they be reading into those actions and those events or that behavior nearly as much? But so what did you think of the door?
Yeah, that was I feel like every scene that is filmed on that hallway is just so creepy. It's just
Yeah.
like, cuz like every time they walk down the hallway, you hear the creaking of the floor, cuz everything's made out of wood, and it's like when I think of that red door, I think of The Conjuring. There's once they go into this like the red door, I think it's part of the first movie, where they go into the other world, and it's like this creep, like behind the red door kind of creepy thing that is behind the red door. That's what I thought about the whole time I was watching. I was like, geez, there's like something scary behind that door, like there's some kind of demon thing. But I think like that's those scenes, even like in the beginning when they kind of, when Will first breaks in and you get the shot like down the hallway, it's kind of, it makes it seem so long, but it's not really that long of a walk. But just the way it's filmed, they do such a great job at really making such a small scene so intense, because you can hear every noise echoes, because the house is locked in and all the windows are shut, so everything echoes, everything's made out of wood, so you can hear every equipment that gets put on the floor, or something gets thrown on the floor when Will's going through the I guess supply room or something. They're like kind of he's kind of looking for stuff to get. But that scene like near the end where Travis finds the door open, I thought that was like, I was honestly at that point, first time watching, I was like ready for some zombie to break through that door.
Right.
And we don't really get to see that, and I kind of like how it evolves from there, like because then he wakes up Paul and Sarah, and then they kind of like, they're trying to figure out, well, what broke in and how did the door got open. And I don't know, I like that. It really, that scene gets very intensified, although it's such a minor filming part of it. Like it's literally just a hallway, but the way it's filmed, it's such a great job at making the scene so intense.
Yeah, it is really all about the presentation of it. And I agree. And it's funny you mentioned The Conjuring. The door made me think of The Haunting of Hill House, the TV series.
Oh, yeah,
I believe the door that they spend all season trying to get into is a red door as well. But it kind of just, it's interesting that the only color in that house is the red door. And historically in horror movies or books or whatever, it's the color red is like it's like the scarlet letter, essentially. It's like an omen for something evil, obviously it being red and blood and whatnot. But it's interesting that the door represents death, essentially. And that once the door is opened unexpectedly, it's kind of like death is being brought into the house, which it leads to the conclusion, which has some deadly consequences, which we learn about. But I think you're right in that it's portrayed in those dream sequences, and they do shoot that hallway in a very dreamlike manner. Like you said, in reality, it's not that long of a hallway. That wouldn't make any sense. Nobody would make a house like that. But the way that it's filmed in the dream sequences, it looks like this almost never-ending hallway. And it comes back to just the way that the overall film is really lit, and that we see it's mostly shadows inside, obviously. And the only light that we see and are reliant on is lanterns and flashlights. And just the idea that this door is the only thing that's keeping all of the evil away from these people for a majority of the film. And then we discover it's been open and yet there's nobody there. That is probably one of the scariest moments of the film for me, in that we see our suspicion and paranoia, or the character's suspicion and paranoia, is really found. Like later we see the next scene is them talking at the dinner table, and we start accusing one another of like, who could have unlocked the door? And it's like, oh, the little boy was sleepwalking. He doesn't sleepwalk. Oh, well, I found him in this room or whatever. It's like, yeah, but he can't reach the locks. And so it had to have been an adult at that point. And then up until that point, it's only 5 people. And my perception of it, of the end of the film, kind of bled into the role that dreams play. Like I started to think, is this just a nightmare that Travis is having? Because it's like the worst thing that could ever happen is the door being open and people getting in, and yet there's no clear-cut answer. And that goes into the rest of the film, where the film is not very concerned with giving concrete answers. And so in not having a clear-cut answer to that, like, oh, it was Will, it was Travis, it was whoever, it kind of just lends to the idea that this is a dangerous place and you cannot trust anyone.
Right. Yeah. No, that connection with the dreams, I was also trying to figure out, like, whether, I wonder if he was actually dreaming or was he actually sleepwalking? Because like there's scenes where he goes outside in the woods, and I was honestly hoping to, because there's one scene where he goes outside and he finds the gun on the grass or on the dirt, and he kind of like points at something. He hears a noise in the forest, and he points at it, and he's like in shock. So I was really honestly hoping to see what he saw, or I wish it would have been revealed at the end of the movie or something. But for me, it was like, I was in the dream sequence, I was like, well, is he really dreaming? There's certain scenes where it's like he was you can tell he was dreaming. But like for me, when he went outside, I wonder if that was him sleepwalking and not realizing that he was sleepwalking.
Mhm.
I mean, I think that would have added more of a scare to it. At least for me, it's like where he wakes up and there's dirt on his foot because he was sleepwalking outside and like he didn't know it.
Mhm.
But that whole like door sequence I thought was very, very intense because it also builds even more intense, like an intense relationship between the two families. Like, well, you're blaming my kid, but my kid is not old enough or he's not tall enough to open the door. And it's like, well, Paul is definitely, I feel like at that point, Paul is definitely taken to a level of 1,000, just like questioning them. Like now it's like I feel like they have to go. Like there's no, at this point there's no trust between them, and you can tell like Paul's kind of like this is probably their last day because obviously after that it kind of goes downhill. But yeah, you definitely, for me, Paul is almost like a reminder of like safety first kind of thing throughout the whole movie. And it's like as soon as you question it, like he questioned himself questioning them, but now it's like I can't question them anymore, like I have to make a move kind of thing. So that's kind of where it kind of leads up and to the next, or I guess the final sequence, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into that ending because it's a pretty heavy ending, and I think I texted you when you suggested we watch this, and I was like, yeah, I'm down for a rewatch. I mean, I hope you pour yourself a strong drink because from what I remembered and what was confirmed on a rewatch, like it's an incredibly fucked up ending where we see the Will and his family want to leave, and we assume that the little boy is sick just because he's coughing, and we see the extremes that Paul and his family go to in reacting to that. And so we get a little bit of a standoff, and then Will gets knocked out and he almost beats Paul to death. And so Sarah shoots him, killing him. But then Will's family runs off, and then Paul chases after them and shoots. And you assume he shoots Riley Keough's character, and yet the worst case fucking scenario is where he misses her and kills the kid. And it's just like this horrific gut punch moment that before you even see the body lying there, and it doesn't show you anything. It just shows the little boy lying there. Just hearing Riley Keough screaming is the most disturbing part of the movie for me, especially when we see Paul's reaction to what he's done. Like when he realizes, oh shit, I missed. Or did he even really miss? Because if you're shooting at somebody carrying a kid, like there's only one outcome. But seeing his realization of what he did and him being like horrified with himself, but then he snaps out of that after like 3 or 4 seconds and he just guns down Riley Keough after that. And it just shows he takes everything to the extreme in terms of the survival of his family, as it were.
Yeah, that scene was intense. I thought that I kind of like, I think Riley really sold that scene for me. It was like shit, like she's feeling like pain. Her kid got killed. Like that's like pain. You can tell in her cry, the way her performance was great in that scene. I thought she really sells the fact that her child just got shot. And at that moment, I like I said, like you were saying, like Paul kind of just shoots her, but like he has a headstand moment of like I kind of got the like the feeling of like he's like, what have I become kind of thing, where it's like he shot the kid. I don't know if that was his intent. We don't know if that's his intention or not, but it's like, holy shit, I killed a little baby here. And it's like at that point, he's kind of like frozen, really thinking about like, shit, what do I do next? Should I kill the mother or not? And it comes down to like, yeah, I mean, she's already suffering. Cause I thought that to myself. I'm like, the mother's already suffering. There's nothing good that's going to come out of this. You killed her husband and her kid. At this point, you might as well just kill her. Like that was my thought. And I was like, and you can tell that Paul at that point was like, what have I become? Because even after that, you can tell that Paul has just completely changed man in that sense. Like he really took that to heart, the fact that he killed the kid. And I guess maybe he put himself in shoes of imagining his son dying, Travis, and that kind of really like hit him. And I thought that was a crazy ending for a movie that was, the fact that it was, to say it was slow, but it was more of like character relationship building to get to that point of the extreme. I thought it was a great ending for it.
Riley Keough does not have a massive role in a majority of the film. She has little moments of dialogue and whatnot, and we have that great scene with Travis when they meet in the kitchen. But she doesn't have a massive scene in the movie other than the ending, and she really does give it her all, and she sells that ending to the point that that scene is not the same scene unless it's her with that scream and that kind of like guttural pleading and grief and whatnot. And it really just does capture the overall intensity and unrelenting nature of the movie, in that the world has consequences now, and the consequences are nothing but extreme. There's no half consequences, which results in there being characters that can't afford to take any half measures. You can't let these people go. They're going to bring other people back, or
Right.
they're going to risk us getting infected or killed. So it shows that there is that contrast between Paul and his son, where Paul is the one that's willing to do certain things, and Travis is the one that is like, hey, these could be good people. We should give them the benefit of the doubt, this and that. And it just shows what happens when you give people the benefit of the doubt. And I mean, nobody learns that. Well, in terms of Paul's immediate family, nobody learns that harder than Travis, who,
Right.
after having all of these dreams of him becoming sick, ends up becoming sick himself in real life.
That also was a pretty rough one, because you get to see, like, we get to see when he's laying in bed from his point of view. He's like, his vision is blurry. He's like, he can see his mom, and like Sarah's talking to him, and he's kind of like out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And she kind of talks to him like, just go to sleep, kind of like stop fighting it.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty sad to have your, I don't know, putting yourself in Sarah's shoes. It's like having your kid die before you. I think it's probably the worst thing that could happen in your life. Yeah. And to tell them like, it's okay to like just die, like it's fine. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's probably the roughest thing you could do.
Yeah, and it shows just things coming full circle, because that's how the movie begins, right? With
right.
the grandpa,
yeah.
And Sarah says the same thing. And to see that happen to Travis, obviously, if it's an elderly person, they're like in their 80s, you don't want anybody to die, but it's a little more expected. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, you can look back and say, oh, it's obviously unfortunate they died, and yet they were able to live this long life filled with experiences and memories and all these things. Mm-hmm. Whereas the protagonist of the film is an adolescent. And again, like you said, the added pain of a parent burying their child, which is, I would assume, the worst thing imaginable, which is not natural in the grand scheme of things, knock on wood. It's something that really kind of solidifies just the morose, unforgiving nature of this world that Schultz has created, makes this post-apocalyptic setting really stick in a way that I don't think necessarily does with a lot of post-apocalyptic movies, where it's like, the easy example is like The Walking Dead or whatever. And it's like, that kind of just feels like a setting that has people in it that are fighting zombies and fighting other people. Whereas this, it really is death is the antagonist, and it's a palpable sense of death and grief, which I think comes across so well, because Schultz said that he wrote this movie in, I think, 3 days while he was grieving the loss of his father. And that really, which is insane. And it's very telling, though, that those emotions he was feeling, he was able to translate to the page in a way that I think really comes across and makes that grief and pain very palpable in a way that is not easy. Like, how many movies do we see about family dramas where families experience loss and we're like, okay, that signifies the end of this character. Whereas in this film, like, it's a draining movie, and it's emotionally draining. Like I said earlier, I wanted to watch his first film, Krisha, which is also streaming on Netflix. And I decided I'm going to wait at least a week before I watch it, because like I had 2 whiskeys while I was watching this, because I was just like, oh, fuck, this is just so rough and depressing. And yet it's so affecting in a way that not a lot of post-apocalyptic movies are. I mean, our COVID situation notwithstanding, it's just, it's a very, very bleak and disturbing film, which not everybody enjoys those elements of a film, but I would rather have a film that leaves me feeling, I'm so affected by it that I feel differently about it, rather than kind of just the towing the line apocalypse movie.
Yeah, I feel like the director does such a good job at making this movie as realistic of what a zombie apocalypse would be in real life. I think that's what kind of like, it makes it more creepy. Like, if there was an apocalypse of some sort, I feel like this would be it. Like, this virus that, like, you don't know how, like, I mean, I guess they know because they touch someone that's already sick, but like, you don't really know how it travels. Like, at least in the movie, we don't really know how it gets there. Like, we find out that the dog gets sick, and like, I guess someone kills the dog and it brings it into the house, but it's like, well, there's like so much more to that. I mean, that, like, the fact that the dog ran after something that we don't really see, we don't get to see. Is it a monster, or is it a human being? What is it? Like, what's with the virus, you know? And like, there's so many questions that I have that are kind of left, like, about the movie, that's kind of just left out there, which makes it even more intense for me, at least in the movie. It's like, they don't explain things. It's like, shit, and I'm curious about this. I wish they would explain it, but at the same time, I'm glad they didn't, because it makes the movie that much better.
Yeah.
because there's so minimal information about what the virus is and how it really affects them and how you can become um, affected by it. And it's just like that fact that there's so many questions about it, for me, it makes it that much better.
The older I get, the less answers I want.
Yeah.
Like, I read stuff online and from people that are just like, went to go see it. This doesn't explain anything. I've got all these questions. And it's like, yeah, a movie that doesn't answer your questions when it's not designed to make you question things really, yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of shitty. But in this film, it's so imperative that we don't understand everything and there's that doubt. And I mean, no example is clearer of that than when after they're ambushed, Paul is talking to Sarah and she's like, well, were those men tracking us or did they see the smoke from the fire when you lit Grandpa on fire? And you're like, oh shit, I didn't even think of that. And yet that's a perfect example of something that is very plausible. It's A or B, right? It's either they're with Will and Will is lying about them being his friends and they were looking to hunt those the people down to take over their home, or is it, hey, they're scavengers just like us that saw the smoke and it led them to our house or to our general area? Because that's one of the main points of contention is Paul says, you traveled for 80 miles or whatever and didn't see anybody. And all of a sudden these guys are right near my house. And it's like, oh, maybe Will did tell them where they were going or whatever. Or maybe they saw the fire from, because it's black smoke. It's not white smoke. So, hey, you could see that from miles away. Perhaps they saw it and they're heading in that direction. So the movie not answering a lot of our questions. And I did see online, there's that scene where we see the dog and it's barking, but we can't see what it's barking at.
Yeah.
Apparently somebody slowed down the footage and zoomed in. Apparently you can see a body moving behind a tree out in the far distance, but and they said, oh, that proves there's somebody there. I've read another theory that it's just a crew member. That there's a crew member out in the middle of the woods that's signaling to the dog to bark and have that reaction because something has to do that. But I think that regardless of that, whether it is a crew member or it's supposed to be somebody stalking them, Schultz captures this idea that the woods are so thick and vast that even if there isn't somebody there, staring out into the wilderness like that and thinking there's something there can be scarier. Like, an anecdote for me is my grandparents live out in the woods in the country, and I go there like every year. And it's one of those things where you look out into the acres and acres of heavily wooded areas, and I can't help, maybe it's like my horror-centric brain, but I can't help but stare into the tree line and just expect to see somebody hiding there standing behind a tree. And especially at night, like my grandfather installed floodlights. So when you turn on the floodlights and it goes into the woods and you're just staring into the woods, I expect to see a mask or a face half the time. And it's Jesus. Like, obviously there never is going to be somebody there, but capturing the woods in that way that is relatable to anybody that has ever been in the woods, I think is the scariest element of this film. And it's scarier than if there's a monster. Like, Schultz made a very clear decision early on in the movie, or for the movie overall, there aren't monsters. The emphasis is people. And no scene is more apparent of that kind of grief and it being more relatable to being a person than watching the grandfather die. It's seeing him being put down essentially instead of him turning into this mutant zombie that tries to rip everybody apart. Like, you're never going to see a zombie mutant rip somebody apart. You might be faced with a situation, knock on wood, where you have to watch an elderly person die like that. Or let me rephrase that. Seeing them struggling so heavily that the decision is that you're going to have to euthanize them essentially. Hopefully not with a pillow and a gun in the woods, but something a little more medically sound. But I just found that to be super palpable and disturbing in a way that I don't think a lot of horror films are able to be that affecting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it also goes with the story too, the way that the story is written. But for me, I didn't understand why they would burn the body and you just bury the body. I mean, if it's a virus, like, I don't understand what the effect of burning. That was my one question about it. It's like, well, why would you burn the body if you're creating smoke? You're kind of showing people that are out there, whoever's left, that there's life there and something's burning, so they're gonna go check it out. For me, it was like, well, you could have just buried the body. It wouldn't have made a difference. At least that's what I thought. But that was my one question, or I guess my one concern with the movie. It's like, why'd you burn the body instead of burying it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a thing in a lot of the like virus or zombie movies where you have to burn the bodies to kill off the infection.
Mm,
But like you said, there's that idea that they're in the middle of the woods, starting a massive fucking bonfire. You could
yeah,
potentially set the woods on fire, and
right.
it's going to signal to people that there's people living there.
Hmm.
And the idea that they wouldn't just wheel him a couple extra 100 feet away from the house, I feel
Yeah,
like it's not that much effort. You could just
that's
bury
true.
him very, very far away from the house. I get they want to live in this land, but
Yeah,
if you bury him super far away from the house, you don't have to worry about traipsing around a potentially infected corpse or anything like that. I mean,
right.
I understand why they do that, but at the same time, maybe it speaks to inexperience with survival skills. Like
Yeah,
they are experienced, and we see that in how they deal with will breaking in and the kind of protocol for quarantine and all these things.
yeah,
And yet, maybe there's facets of this surviving in a new world that they haven't completely grasped or mastered yet. Like this is the first family member that they've had to bury, I would assume.
hmm,
And so
right.
but then again, they start another fire after that later in the film. So
Yeah,
who knows?
it's kind of questionable, but I mean, I don't know. For me, one of the favorite, like, just to get into the actor part of it, like Joel, I think did an amazing job playing Paul.
Hmm.
I thought he's definitely my favorite character out of all of
Yeah.
them, at least. I thought his performance was amazing. Just to, like, the way he did the role of, like, being this safety survivor kind of guy, like, that he has to take care of his family, and overall I thought his performance was great. Just the way he goes from 0 to 100 in the sense of keeping family safe, and trying to negotiate of, like, we'll give you cans of food, you give us goats kind of thing, and, like,
Hmm.
just like his overall performance, I thought was amazing.
Yeah, I was really, really impressed with Kelvin Harrison Jr.'s performance as
Mm,
Travis. In that, obviously, we get the adolescent perspective, but his character has such a wide range of emotions. He goes from grief to interest to trauma to, for lack of a better word, like arousal, and then he just runs the full spectrum of emotions in
yeah,
this film, and we really see how this situation affects people in this fucked up reality that they're living in. And I mean, it makes me want to watch his other movies too, just because he seems like a very young but a very promising rising star, just in terms of
mhm,
the range of emotions. And he wasn't. I mean, it speaks to the writing as well, but he was able to back that writing up. He's not just like the bratty teen that's screaming and overreacting to everything. Like it feels very genuine, everything that he emotes, whether it's
yeah,
the grief of dealing with his grandfather, a second round of grief when his dog dies, who was his grandfather's property,
mm,
what to when he meets Kim, all these different things that it doesn't feel like a traditional sort of adolescent performance for what it is.
yeah,
But I mean, I
yeah,
think, and like you said, his relationship with his father is the central drive essentially of the movie in a way that, um, while I've never had to live through well, not as deadly of a pandemic with
yeah,
my father, but just seeing some of the rough edges to that relationship and how it's like he doesn't understand why his father is so seemingly so aggro, but that's
hmm,
only because his father has more than likely seen things that he has not had to see before.
right. I guess it comes to, like, the his teenage mindset, that it's like I'm kind of glad that he's not the aggressive, like you were saying, aggressive teen that yells and make noise and gets into trouble,
Mhm.
because I that would really piss me off. I don't know. I would
Yeah,
have been so annoyed at a
right.
character like that in situations like this. It really annoys me when a kid is like almost like watching Ozark kind of thing. It's like where the kids are just always doing some stupid thing where you're not supposed to be doing. Like, you have clearly rules that your parents told you, don't do this, don't share this information. It's like, and then they actually do the opposite of what the parents tell them. It really bothers me. But I'm glad he does a great job. Calvin does a great job at really selling his role. And just like you were saying, like, his range of emotions, I thought they were they were amazing. I mean, I thought for that, I mean, to be a young actor and being able to perform those emotions on command, I'm assuming, like
Mhm.
the crying and the fact that he feels almost falls in love with this random girl that he just met, and then he has to go through the grief of his family dying, and his dog dying. It's like that's a great performance. That's like a very wide range of a lot of emotions in one movie, which I'm assuming for an actor must be very hard to do.
Mhm.
But yeah, I thought it was an amazing performance on his part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think in reapproaching this movie with better expectations for what it actually is, it's easier for us, I think, to appreciate the range of these performances and to really
Yeah.
focus on this is character driven. This is based on their emotions and how this situation shapes them as people, and how fear essentially is the thing that they should be fearing rather than other people to a certain degree.
Right.
But yeah, did you have any last minute points that I breezed past?
No, I mean, I was just gonna say the character that plays Will, I honestly thought it was the same guy that plays Jon Snow. I don't know
Oh,
why.
Kit
For me,
Harington.
yeah, for me it was like, is that the guy that plays Jon Snow? That's the only thing.
Christopher Abbott is he was in a movie with John Berthnall called
Uh,
Sweet Virginia. That was like a neo noir movie. That was like a
yeah.
crime movie where John Berthnall is a motel manager, but
Hmm.
he's very good at not eliciting a lot of emotion on the face value.
Yeah.
Like if you just look at him, you can't tell what he's thinking.
Right.
You can only
Yeah.
tell what he's thinking through what he says in his actions, and that's the perfect type of actor to contrast against Joel Edgerton, who is very much he emotes a lot, I think.
Right.
And when you contrast those two, it really does create friction between them in a way that
Mhm.
makes for good drama, especially a
Right.
family drama or survival drama.
Yeah. No, I think the balance of those two characters really helped along the story and the plot of the movie, like really build up the tension that would be built had these two people met, and like had this been real life and you would met, like this tension would have definitely built up. And I think their acting and their character themselves, really they did a great job at selling it to be realistic, as in the sense of like, if you meet a random person you would question them just like Paul did.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time you would do the same thing that Will did in line to make sure your family survives, which I thought was a great way to have these characters come in contact with each other and really meet. It really adds a lot to the movie.
Complements this sense of just unknowing, and there's no good guys or
Yeah.
bad guys. There's only survivors in this world, and
Right.
that's usually not so clear cut in a lot of these kind of post-apocalyptic survival movies. It's usually the good and the bad are extremes of the same thing. You know what I mean? There's the
Mhm.
good guys that are the saviors that want to save everybody, and then there's the bad guys that they're like eating people or something like that. And so just to have have a movie that is a horror-centric post-apocalypse movie that is all about survivors and the neutrality almost of survivors, and that we're
Yeah.
just surviving. And even if I do something that is perceived as being violent or evil, my intention
Mhm.
is not so to be evil, which we
Right.
see with Paul. Like, he ends up killing an entire family, and one of the members is small children, which is a despicable crime. But is he doing those things because he wants to, because he enjoys it, because he's trying to take something from them? No, it's all about survival.
Right.
And Schultz gives us a view of the extremes of that that
Yeah.
survivor's instinct. And we may not like it, but it's very affecting, and it's very brutal.
I think he did what he had to do in order to survive. So I think it's like, whether you like it or not, that had to happen. Or else, had he left Kim to run with the kid, what if she came back with 20 other people
Right.
and they would have taken over the house? So it had to be done. And also, I like Carmen's performance as Sarah, because I felt like she was the middleman between Travis and Paul,
Yeah.
because she seemed like more of reasoning, like she took in consideration Travis's point of view, trying to convince Paul to do certain things. But at the same time, as the movie goes on, you get to see she's starting to take more of Paul's point of view, because Paul is more of a survival mode. Now you have other people come into your house and it's like, well, now I have to rely more on Paul because these people could kill us and take over the house. And I thought she did a great job at that, in the fact that for me it came off as being her being the middleman between a innocent person who doesn't understand the thing about survival, and Paul being very aggressive in survival mode all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought she did a great job at her performance.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really core to the film, and this role that mothers play
Yeah.
in a family. And it's more so in terms of Paul's family than in Will's family that we see this, where, like you said, she's the middleman essentially, or the mediator between the two of them. And while at the beginning of the film, she's a little more leaning towards Travis in that she's
Yeah.
understanding, she says, give him the benefit of the doubt, these things. But when it's go time, like, she's a
Yeah.
ride or die, essentially.
Right.
Like, hey, we've gone to a place that we can't walk back. I have to do these things or people are going to die. Granted,
Right.
she waits a little long to save Paul while he's getting his face fucking bashed in by a rock. But at the end of the day, she's the one that shoots Will. And that is kind of like the signifier for we've gone to the point of no return, in that the Kim is running with the child and they're going to get away. Like you said, she could bring back 20 people from a camp that they're scouts for or whatnot. And so just that reality of the unknown again, and it being so character driven, really speaks to just how strong this film is at conveying that. Because again, there's no literal boogeyman, but for me, it's more disturbing and more affecting to realize that in this fucked up reality, we're all the boogeyman, essentially.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. But hey, I appreciate you picking It Comes at Night for us to talk about, because this is a film that I've wanted to rewatch for a while, but didn't have the balls necessarily to revisit it just because of how disturbing it was. But based on your recommendation and a glass of liquid courage or two, I was glad to finally get to revisit it and have such an in-depth conversation about it with you. So thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Anytime. I mean, I thought it was, I'm glad I decided, because I had two options and I'm glad you picked this one, because I was kind of iffy about the other one, but I just wanted to give it a shot because I haven't watched it. And this one, I knew it was kind of slow, but I don't know why I just decided to give it a shot. I wanted to rewatch, and I thought it was worth a rewatch. So
that's one of those things, man. I'm finding the more I have guests on and letting them decide, which is what I generally try to do. Like, once I shoot out a list of people sometimes when they can't think of something, I'm like, hey, pick something off of this. And so this time you came to me with a list basically, and I was like, oh, hey, that's a film that I was not planning on revisiting, but now I'm glad I had the opportunity to revisit it. And I mean, we got the result, and I think it was a great conversation. So again, I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Daily Horror Habit on your preferred streaming service and follow @Daily Horror Habit on Instagram and @Daily Horror Pod on Twitter.